Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. This time around, we're talking about a story from early 2022 that sounds like a half-baked crossover between a Cold War thriller and a bad blind date. Now, you might recall that in late February 2022, Russia decided to wake up one morning and say, "Oh, hey Ukraine, nice borders you got there. Mind if we completely disregard them?" But here is what's surprising. As the Russians tried and failed to encircle Kiev, as missiles rained down and everyone was losing their minds, there was also a frantic flurry of diplomacy happening behind the scenes. And that is what we're covering today, bringing you back to 2022 and the negotiations towards peace that never was. But was it ever feasible? Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The matter of peace talks to resolve the war in Ukraine is currently a hot topic. Even if a serious effort is made in the coming year, it will not be the first. Merely a handful of days after Russia invaded Ukraine, a series of talks was hosted on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. Minsk tried to put itself in the position of a mediator. Alexander Lukashenko had already made some clumsy efforts at defusing the situation just prior to the war. Despite these journalists and many leaders around the world hoping for a shred of positive news, nothing much came from these negotiations. The next major diplomatic offensive was hosted by Turkey. As it shares maritime borders with both countries via the Black Sea, it decided to hold negotiations in Antalya to resolve the conflict. Despite these talks lasting for many days, an agreement could not be reached. One of the main points of contention was Crimea.
We as Turkey refuse illegitimate steps which ignore the territorial integrity of Ukraine, above all the illegal annexation of Crimea.
These talks were followed by another set in Istanbul. Ukraine was apparently to agree to 4 of Russia's demands at one point during this period, including a renunciation of NATO membership by Kiev. Crimea, however, was off the table once more, and Russia refused to offer any concrete security guarantees. The negotiations in Turkey did, however, help in eventually securing a deal to transport Ukrainian grain across the Black Sea, but following this period, the negotiations stalled. In July of 2022, the Russian Foreign Minister shut down any hopes of them thawing.
It doesn't make any sense in the current situation. I have no doubt that the Ukrainians will not be allowed to negotiate until the Americans decide that they have already scandalized enough here.
As the war progressed, Russia began targeting civilian sites such as children's hospitals or critical infrastructure. Moscow has been accused of many war crimes, complicating matters. Presidents Putin and Zelensky have not met face-to-face since the war began. They haven't even held a single phone call. The largest summit dedicated to the matter of peace in Ukraine was held in Switzerland and was organized by Ukraine, but Russia was not included.
And now, we're jumping into a time machine, going back to 2022 to take a look at the issue in greater detail. While the world watched Russian forces underperform like a lazy understudy in a school musical, Ukrainian and Russian negotiators were logging into Zoom calls, popping into hotels in Belarus and Turkey, and basically trying to fix the problem that started with a man who thought the phrase denazification would be reasonable justification for a full-scale attack. Talk about setting someone's houses on fire and then showing up to offer helpful advice on smoke alarms. The first peace meeting took place in Minsk on the 28th of February 2022, just 4 days into Russia's brutal invasion. By late March 2022, something called the Istanbul communique emerged, a draft framework suggesting Ukraine could be neutral and gain security guarantees from multiple countries, including Russia. Security guarantees in this context basically meant Ukraine wanted something a touch stronger than those "I promise I won't cheat on you" pinky swears from 1994 Budapest Memorandum. The one where the US, the UK and Russia said, "We absolutely won't attack you," and then, years later, Russia said, "JK, lol." This time, Ukraine wanted legit guarantees, actual intervention if Russia tried to do the whole crash your sovereignty like a wedding thing again. For a hot second, it looked like they might actually pull it off. Russia would be the chill guy about NATO membership, and Ukraine could continue on their path to joining the European Union. Oh yeah, and I guess everyone would pretend that spending the past month trying to blast each other into the Stone Age was just a silly-billy maneuver. That's right, Russia, who had just tried to storm Kiev, was, on paper, sort of agreeing to facilitate Ukraine joining the EU, again, kind of like someone mugging you and then offering you to give you a lift to the hospital. You appreciate the gesture, right? But you can't help noticing the person still has your wallet. Of course, the devil was in the details here. Would Ukraine really accept any land grabs that Russia had already accomplished? And would Russia back down on sneaking in clauses about denazification that basically demanded Ukraine rewrite its historical memory laws according to the Kremlin's whims? Well, ultimately, no one knew because the deal fell through. By May, the negotiators parted ways, and the war has raged on ever since, claiming countless lives and displacing millions. But there could come a moment where adversaries will be willing to sign on the dotted line. So here is to the hope Ukraine is in the best negotiating position when the time to sit at the table actually comes. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Paweł Slonkin, Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hi, thank you.
So let's begin with a brief glance into the past. Quite a while ago, you used to be a member of the Belarusian administration and you did participate in the Minsk negotiations. We're talking about 2015. Now, when you look forward to 2022, it is often said that Ukraine had the opportunity to conclude a peace deal, but it didn't take advantage of that opportunity. Was this an opportunity to begin with?
Well, I don't think so. When the country is invaded and then it is on the edge of collapsing, the whole country, and they are just made to capitulate, I don't think this is something that diplomats like me or other diplomats would consider as negotiations. This is just the process of when you're trying to be made of some solutions that are not really good for your country or for your sovereignty. This is one of the main differences between the 2015 and 2022. Then we didn't have a Russian army, like official Russian army in Ukrainian territory. They having separatists who were fighting with Russian weapons, with some of their soldiers who were fighting, but not officially from the Russian army. And the capacities of that forces in the Ukrainian territory in 2015 was very much different. So Ukraine was better positioned then. And in negotiations in 2015, we had Angela Merkel, we had François Hollande, who was on the side with Petro Poroshenko, and only Vladimir Putin was like on the other side of the table. And Ukraine could really negotiate at least something, at least a ceasefire that we finally agreed upon. But in 2022, it was just about capitulating.
So when Russia says there was a peace deal on the table, but the warmongers from Washington and London prevented it from happening, this is all propaganda, isn't it?
Well, of course.
Some people in the West, they actually tend to look at these arguments and take them at face value. And they say, Ukraine could have stopped this war long ago. Well, from what you're saying, it couldn't unless it wanted to self-destruct.
Well, from what I know, that the country that invades can stop the war. The country that is invaded can stop the war because they never started it. So this is kind of a basic issue of logic, right? I think that the reason why some Western politicians, especially in the Trump administration, when they're talking that, they're just talking because they are not happy with what is really what their positions in Ukraine are. They spend a lot of money there, and they don't see a real success, and they don't believe that Ukraine can liberate the territories without any radical escalation of the war into the nuclear war that they were afraid of. And this is the reason why they just expect that Putin would at some moment stop and then maybe reconsider his position. So this is the idea. I don't think that they really hope to have any peace agreement, because we had peace before Russia first invaded Ukraine in 2014. Then we had another peace solution of Minsk II, and then like all the time they were broken. So the next peace agreement would be broken too, because Russia attacks Ukraine not just to have any ceasefire. They want more.
So Russia has a tradition of disrespecting previous agreements, like Budapest Memorandum springs to mind, doesn't it? So just by way of a quick recap, if Ukraine accepted that deal back in 2022, what kind of country would it have been today?
Well, I think it will be the country that would be invaded still, but maybe in some 2, 3, 4 years, because Russia would be still blaming Ukraine of not respecting the agreement, like they did with Minsk II agreement. They were saying that even despite what we agreed upon on the Minsk protocol, Ukraine allegedly were not respecting the agreement and violating that. So I think that Ukraine would already agree, sign upon the contract, agreeing to give a lot of concessions to Russia, and still would be pushed to do more and more and more until Russia has complete control over the country.
Now, what about politically? According to what we know about this document, it would hardly have been a politically independent and sovereign nation at all.
Yeah, I agree. Almost no army, so you can't even protect your country. And also, I mean, talking about the domestic position, the government that signs this agreement probably ends up with having no support among its population. So this was also the idea of Russia, how to impose some more pro-Russian forces or to make the current government collapse.
So now, moving on to what is being, what is being prepared today, because Ukraine and Russia are supposed to be gearing up for some sort of peace talks. Ukraine says it wants to participate. Russia is giving mixed signals. And, that's a generous statement, so it's mixed signals, really. What do you expect to happen now? Do you think that Russia would be willing to take part in that? I'm not even asking if it's going to be in good faith, because we've already established Russia hardly ever does that. But will they actually sit down at the table at all?
Well, I think that they would, but it very much depends on what concessions would be given to Russia from Washington. So now the decision or the process, the whole negotiation process, or I would call it the ceasefire process, the initiative is going from Washington. And now I think that Russia's further compromise, whether they would agree on something or not, depends on how many concessions would Trump administration give to the Kremlin.
It's going to be about neutrality, right? Russia initially said that Ukraine has to remain neutral, but it's going to be about the meaning of neutrality, because for Russia, neutrality means defenseless, probably subjugated politically, a puppet state. From what we know about Trump's plan, it would mean no NATO membership, but a country that has strong democratic institutions and a strong army capable of defending itself in case of further attacks, not to mention the possible presence of European troops in the potential demilitarized zone. So this understanding of neutrality is very different than the Russian one, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure that Trump's understanding of Ukrainian neutrality is the one that you described. I don't really know what Trump's think about Ukraine, and the one that, what he expects, what are the concessions that Ukraine should agree to not provoke. And
well, like the Kellogg flights plan, with Keith Kellogg right now being the main person in charge of the negotiations. During that period before Trump actually is taking office, this plan was released, and it assumes that Ukraine would have to give up the idea of NATO membership. In exchange, would actually have to settle for a situation whereby there is a demilitarized zone, but also it will still retain sovereignty and armed forces capable of self-defense.
Yeah,
that's what we know, right, from them.
Yeah, I agree. This is the Kellogg's plan. I'm not sure that Kellogg's plan is the same with Trump's plan. So this is also something that we know about Donald Trump and his administration. People who don't agree with him, they leave the administration very soon. And I'm not sure that if Putin don't agree with Kellogg's plan, then Trump would just find another person who would present another plan. So that's the problem. What Donald Trump understands as Ukrainian neutrality or Ukrainian position in order to not provoke Russia or to have the peace agreement with Russia. But yeah, on neutrality, there is another alternative option that I think that Ukraine is now pushing, is that we have an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO, and then the Article 5 protects the lands that are now under control by Kyiv, the official Ukrainian government, and the rest would be brought back to Ukraine officially through diplomatic talks. So this is a new position of the Ukrainian government that has shifted very much from what we had under Biden.
But, let's be honest, this would be the better option, because we know that, NATO actually gives you robust security guarantees. Different kinds of agreements that existed in the past, like the Budapest Memorandum, again, proved to be slightly ineffective, again, to say the least. Now, what would you say is Lukashenko thinking right now? Apparently, there are signals that they want to be included in the potential peace talks. And there is a question of sovereignty. To what extent Belarus can actually decide for itself, because apparently one of the reasons why they want to participate is that they don't want to be perceived in the West as being a vassal state of Russia.
Yeah, I do agree with this. I think that Lukashenko realizes how dependent he is on Russia. And to understand this, you just need to check the economic balance of trade of Belarus. 95% of Belarusian foreign goods, they sold abroad through Russian territory. This means that Russia can really turn off Belarusian economy in one day, and this means that Lukashenko is like really very much dependent on Putin, and Lukashenko would want to at least get some of this position back. And of course, when he is, and if he is included in the negotiation process, he would protect his own interest, not only of Russian interests. That does mean that their interests wouldn't be aligned. Of course, they would agree on same positions, that it would be playing in the same team, but at the same time, different members of the team have different interests. And Lukashenko wants to be there because he knows that it is important, because part of the problem was his own territory, his permission of Russia to attack Ukraine from the Belarusian territory. This means that this territory should be also somehow solved, how to prevent their further attack from the Belarusian territory. And then is the issue about Belarusian sovereignty of these territories. Who will make sure that this agreement is respected? Whether it should be Kremlin, I don't think that Lukashenko does want to have this right to Moscow. So he wants to be that. And if this is something that his territory, where he has control over, is negotiated, so he should be at the table. This is his thinking, and I think it's pretty logical, pretty understandable. The problem is that he's illegitimate, and this is another issue that comes from 2020 agreement, 2020 political crisis that we had in Belarus. So maybe their compromised solution would be having some officials from the Belarusian official government, or the de facto of the regime, and also the democratic opposition. So both of the sides at the table that would bring some alternative views on what is happening, but having Lukashenko outside the table.
So again, this is something that sounds like a very good solution, and also one that Lukashenko probably is not going to like, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
But still, it is a very good point. He is not even a legitimate leader of the country. Pavel Slunkin was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Starting off with matters surrounding Ukraine, US President-elect Donald Trump has criticized the decision to allow Kiev to strike targets within Russia. Trump had previously hinted at significantly lowering the amount of support Ukraine would be getting from the United States under his administration.
Donald Trump hasn't hidden his intention to be the one to end the war in Ukraine. He has openly said that if elected, he would do so very quickly, even within 24 hours of taking control of the White House. Some of his statements on the conflict, however, have sparked concern among Washington's allies. His latest controversial words concerned the Biden administration's decision to permit Ukraine to strike targets deep within Russian territory using US-made arms. Trump called this an escalation, which was making, to quote, things worse. The issue concerns one type of weapon in particular, ATACMS, which Ukraine uses to hinder Russia's efforts. Just days after Kiev struck Russian territory with its first ATACMS, Moscow responded by striking Ukrainian targets with a new kind of intermediate ballistic missile. The US President-elect has not commented on whether he would actually withdraw Ukraine's permission to use the system in such a way.
History has been made as the European Union has fully accepted both Romania and Bulgaria into the Schengen zone. The two member states will enjoy visa-free travel with the rest of the bloc starting on the 1st of January 2025.
This is the moment Sofia and Bucharest have been waiting for ever since they joined the European Union 18 years ago, and since they fulfilled the technical criteria to join Schengen 15 years ago. In the eyes of many Bulgarians and Romanians, they have become truly fully-fledged members of the bloc. The road to this decision was tough, paved with many series of negotiations over the years. Both countries were partially admitted to Schengen in March 2024, but some opposition remained. One of the main concerns was illegal migration, as emphasized by Austria and other bloc members. Even starting next year, random checks will still be performed on the Romanian border, for example for 6 months. But very soon, sites like these will stop being commonplace on Bulgarian and Romanian borders. tourists, professionals, and anyone else wanting to cross will be able to do so unobstructed.
Russian lawmakers have passed a bill which expands the criteria for the country's terrorists and extremists registry. Observers have criticized Moscow repeatedly for using these criteria as a way to crack down on freedom of speech and independent press.
Prior to the Russian Duma passing the new bill, only individuals accused in criminal cases of extremism and terrorism could be added to the registry. Now, those who commit alleged crimes motivated by religious, political, ideological, racial, or national hatred can be added to the registry. The bill will now go to the upper chamber of the Russian parliament for approval and will also have to be signed by Vladimir Putin. It is expected to pass in both of these cases. Being added to the registry also lets Russian authorities freeze individuals' bank accounts without a court order. Over the last several years, Russian authorities have been cracking down on freedom of speech and expression. Journalists, activists, and many people in opposition to Vladimir Putin's regime have been forced to flee the country. In many cases, if they decided to stay, they are arrested on nebulous charges in line with what the new bill entails.
Russia and India have signed their largest oil deal ever. The state-owned Russian oil giant Rosneft has secured a 10-year supply contract with Indian private refiner Reliance worth $13 billion annually.
Russia and India are taking their long-standing partnership to new heights. The two countries are already cooperating closely when it comes to energy, technology, trade and even defense. Bilateral trade between them in the light of the New Deal is expected to reach $100 billion by 2030. India is Russia's biggest importer of crude after the European Union imposed heavy sanctions on Moscow over its invasion of Ukraine. Russian oil now accounts for over a third of India's energy imports. The sanctions have made Russian crude much cheaper, down to approximately $3 to $4 per barrel less than competing grades. The New Deal's 500,000 barrels per day represents around 0.5% of the world's supply. Oil supply will start in January 2025 and will last for a decade, with pricing being reviewed annually based on the current conditions of the oil market. The deal also includes an option to extend it for another 10 years.
And for this episode of Eastern Express is the end of the line. Please stay with us on TVP World for more latest news and updates.